handful of years ago, I was having a conversation with a dear friend of mine from college, and we were dreaming about the future. And I said, if I ever would get a sabbatical, I would use my time to hike the Camino de Santiago in Portugal and Spain. And I didn't know that much about that trek yet, but I knew that there were some paths that were 400 miles or 500 miles or 600 miles. And I said, wouldn't it be great to spend a month or two on a big hike? And my friend was like, that would be awesome. If you ever do this, could I join you for part of it? Then fast forward about a year and a half or so, and the church council approved a sabbatical for me, and I applied for and received a grant that would cover a sabbatical adventure. And when I was finally making my plans to do this big walk in Portugal and Spain and turn this someday dream into a reality and buy plane tickets, I called my friend and I said, would you still want to do part of this hike with me? Now, in that time span, while I was planning for this sabbatical, my friend had been diagnosed with cancer and had undergone cancer treatments. And her cancer was newly in remission, but she had been through a lot. She had been sick by all of the cancer treatments. She had been tired a lot. She would try to bounce back and get caught up on all the things in her family life with her husband and her kids. Often she'd overdo it, and then she'd get sick again. And she was trying to figure out what her new normal was. And she wasn't sure if she should attempt to do something like a long walk in Portugal. But her husband and her kids and her physical therapist encouraged her to come with me. So she agreed to join me for part of the journey. She bought a plane ticket and she started to walk more. Now, when I was 200 miles into the path, I made it to Porto, Portugal, and I met my friend, and we had a set of days where we walked together. And we reconnected about life in the recent past and her cancer journey and all the things that she had been going through. And we got blisters all over our feet, and we would spend our evenings bandaging up our toes at night. And we got to commiserate and complain about all of our sore muscles that we had. And we both learned about ourselves and each other at this stage in life. And I think walking the Camino reminded her that she is good at adventuring. Cancer had impacted her life in significant ways. It changed how she had to take care of herself, but it hadn't taken away her passion for adventure. And as her physical therapist had told her, this would be a way for her to think about herself again as a healthy person and not just a sick person. Now, even if you haven't struggled with cancer, you can get stuck telling yourself things that aren't helpful or kind or healthy. In the book Soundtracks by Jon Acuff, he says that one of the greatest mistakes you can make in life is assuming all your thoughts are true. One of the greatest mistakes you can make in life is assuming all your thoughts are true. Jon Acuff says that the stories we tell ourselves become our soundtracks. Just like how we play certain songs or albums over and over, we can play certain thoughts over and over again in our heads. And the negative thoughts are often stickier than the positive thoughts. And the more we listen to them, the more we are shaped by them. Maybe the soundtrack you listen to sounds like, I don't have things together. I'm a disappointment to my family. I'm not attractive enough. I'm not wealthy enough. I'm not a good enough student. I'm not a good enough parent or a good enough friend. These soundtracks are things we all struggle with, and the stories we tell ourselves can stop us from tackling life's challenges before we even start. My friend's soundtrack for a while was, I'm a sick person. I've missed out on a lot of my life for the last few years. My body is not reliable, and maybe I don't even know how to have fun anymore. Walking part of the Camino helped my friend have a new soundtrack. She could see both her limitations and her capacities and learn how to adventure again and enjoy life. What soundtracks are you listening to this season? We probably all have favorite Christmas albums or songs that we love to hear and listen to throughout the month. But what are the soundtracks in your mind? What are the things that you are telling yourself as you get closer to Christmas? And are they helpful and healthy soundtracks, or are they broken soundtracks that keep you stuck? Now, the way to get rid of an unhealthy or a broken soundtrack is by listening to a new soundtrack. And I would like to offer you an oldie but a goodie. It's from an album that Paul dropped 2,000 years ago. Okay, it was from a letter that Paul, an early follower of Jesus, wrote to a group of Christians in a far-flung part of the Roman Empire who were dealing with a whole bunch of struggles. And he wrote this letter to encourage them. And his soundtrack towards the end of the letter says to them, "Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say rejoice." The people that he was writing to had all sorts of struggles and challenges, and he tells them to rejoice. Rejoice? Really? When life is terrible and hard, he says to rejoice? But listen, Paul isn't telling them to rejoice in their circumstances. He's telling them to rejoice in the presence of God. He's not telling them to rejoice in the cancer diagnosis or not being able to make ends meet or not being able to make a relationship work. He says, rejoice in the presence of God. Your circumstances might be legitimately hard, and yet you are not alone. God is with you. Paul knew that joy is not the absence of struggles, but it's the presence of God even in those struggles. You don't need to be told to rejoice when everything is going well and everything is easy for you. It's during those times that are really hard that you need that reminder to look outward and not just get stuck in the current hard situation you're in. And when you look outward, you can see the presence of God and others with you. Then Paul says this, "Do not worry about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God." Instead of a soundtrack full of worries, transform those worries into prayers and bring those prayers to God who cares for you, a God who's listening to you, who wants good for you. When you connect to God in prayer, something amazing happens, according to Paul. He says, "The peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds." The peace of God will guard your hearts and minds. Paul uses a military term here. When he talks about guarding, it means to stand sentry watch over your hearts and your minds. You can find joy because God's peace is on duty. You can stop worrying because God's peace is scanning the horizon for threats. You don't have to do that. You can find things to be thankful for because God's peace has you surrounded on all sides. That's God's job and God's promise to you. Paul reminds these people that they are beloved, and he wants them to think about these things. He gives them a list. He says, whatever is true, honorable, just, pure, pleasing, commendable, if there's any excellence and if there's anything worthy of praise, think about these things. Those are the things to put in your soundtrack. Paul reminds them to focus on things that are good and honorable and true because even back then, people had a hard time having a healthy soundtrack. He's reminding them what you consume matters, where you place your focus matters. Paul didn't have to say, whatever is petty, whatever is unfair, whatever is frustrating, whatever is annoying, whatever makes you feel bad, and if there's anything that is a pet peeve of yours, or if there's anything worthy to criticize, think about those things. He didn't have to say that because we do that naturally. That's our natural inclination. And when we get stuck in that, Paul knows that we need to be directed towards God, towards God's peace and God's presence in our lives. And I wonder if Paul wrote these words to this group of people because he needed to hear it too. He needed to be reminded that with the struggles he was going through, that God was with him too. I like Paul's soundtrack. So many of our soundtracks make us feel alone and inadequate. We are the problem, and we think that we have to lean on our own faulty brains, which sometimes lie to us, to figure everything all out on our own. But Paul allows us to recognize how limited and yet how precious we all are to God. The soundtrack that Paul gives to us helps us see ourselves and God in a new light. It helps us see that we are not alone even in the midst of a busy or stressful season. The Christmas season is a lot. The Christmas season is full of beauty and lights. It's also full of stress. It can also be a time where grief feels fresh. There's just a lot happening in everyone's lives. So don't go through it alone. See where God is in your soundtrack. Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say rejoice. And let God's peace surround you this season, no matter what you're dealing with. You are not alone. That's the soundtrack that I want you to carry with you this month.